everybody, and welcome to this video in which we are going to be talking about retro games again. I know we did a video last week looking at museum archives, Namco Museum Archives Volume 1 and 2, and those are exceptional compilations of classic games that are well worth your time, and I imagine for most retro fans they'll be enough for quite some time to come. However, I did want to do a video looking at the Hamster series of arcade archives, because this series has been kicking around for quite some time now. The first one was released back in 2014, and since then Hamster has actually released 108 of these games across PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, Xbox and PC, and it has done an amazing job of restoring a lot of games that otherwise were so niche and obscure that we would just never have a chance to play again. So they've done a really good thing for the games industry in this series, and I think that it is worth talking about a lot more than perhaps they do get talked about. I know we've never done a video on this series here on digitallydownloaded.net, and I am remedying that today. I also wanted to quickly mention that this video is being recorded with a different headset. I was sent a unit of Sennheiser's GSP 370 wireless gaming headset to review, and this is the first time I've used it, so hopefully the voice comes through nice and clearly, and it's a fine headset. I will have a review up in the gadgets section of digitallydownloaded.net soon enough for it as well. So yes, let's jump into it and talk about classic games. So one of the best things about arcade archives is, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that Hamster has, across the 108 games that it has published, taken on some really niche stuff that we just wouldn't have a chance to see otherwise. You would have seen a kind of Bubble Bobble clone earlier that I was playing called Zoopapa. That is a game that I didn't even know existed, to be honest, until I picked it up on a whim on the Switch store. And as a fan of Snow Brothers and Bubble Bobble and Tumble Pop and that kind of subgenre of arcade game, I absolutely love it. So Hamster has been able to introduce me to games that I otherwise would never be aware existed. And it's certainly not the only example of that in the massive catalogue that are available. And to understand how valuable that is, I want to compare the games industry to the film industry for a moment. So there is some absolutely shocking statistic in the film industry that from the first couple of decades after people started making films, something like 70-80% of those films are completely lost to time. We'll never get a chance to watch them again. And if you think about that, the absolute bulk of films, those classic films, in which people were discovering how to make film and the art form was really developing. So from a historical perspective, all of those films could have been so valuable. They're gone. We just lost them. And the reason for that is simple, that back in those days, the publishers of the films, the production houses, just didn't see the value in archiving them. It did need to be deliberately archived because film degraded quite rapidly, and if you didn't preserve it, if you didn't make copies, if you didn't do a whole bunch of other things to make sure the archives were robust and well maintained, those films would eventually die effectively. And a lot of film production houses just didn't see the commercial value in doing so. Now, of course, we absolutely try to preserve as much film as we can because there is real value in the historical in film as an art form. We recognize that now, but in the 20s and 30s and earlier, film was more a distraction. It wasn't a real art form, so the imperative to preserve it was not quite the same. And it goes for television as well. As Doctor Who fans would know, and Doctor Who is a classic, iconic bit of English culture. It's a very important part of not just English TV, but actually the English mindset. A lot of the early seasons of Doctor Who are gone. We'll just never get a chance to see them because they did such a poor job of archiving television back then. Again, today that seems really weird to us, the idea that something that is filmed today would not be available in the future through digital distribution and whatever, but it just wasn't. So we see the same deal with the video games industry at the moment. There isn't the commercial imperative for a lot of developers and publishers to maintain their classic works. So when something happens, for example, the publisher changes its focus, or it just no longer sees value in looking after one of its older properties, then it just kind of leaves it to die. So a good example is Nintendo themselves. Nintendo does a good job of providing virtual consoles through its consoles. I mean, the Switch one could use a little bit of an expansion beyond the NES and Super NES, but with the 3DS, for example, there was a real effort by Nintendo to preserve the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color and the GBA on the Wii U and all that kind of stuff. The problem was that a lot of Nintendo's games were also overlooked. For example, all the arcade games, Nintendo didn't do a virtual console for its arcade titles because it's not really an arcade publisher anymore. So the commercial imperative, the value for the company to preserve its arcade games is not quite the same. You'd have the NES port of a couple of them, sure, like Pinball here, but you wouldn't have the arcade original. And Hamster's done a really great job in taking those and actually giving us the arcade experience as it once was, flaws and bugs and nonsense and all. You will see in this pinball thing, the flippers actually disappear soon enough. That was a thing. That was a thing, an issue with this game as an arcade title. But Hamster's done a good job in actually preserving them. And because it's done so many of them, because it's been able to get 108 titles into its catalogue, it's been able to also take on some really niche stuff that perhaps a developer with a shorter library would not be able to, because it would sell so few copies. And Hamster really does do a good job of also trying to preserve the actual experience of the arcade through these things. So, for example, every time you boot one of these games up, you have a insert coin message, which obviously you don't have to insert a coin into your console, but the game actually preserves that motion that you need to undertake to physically, do something before you have the credit to play. In this case, it's just to press a button, and you can do it unlimited times, so you can load up 99 credits if you want. But as somebody who grew up in the arcades, I fondly remember actually counting my credits and how much gameplay time I had, and I would actually pick the games that I would play based on whether I'd be able to get far enough through them to make it worth my money. So that little bit of preservation is really valuable. Another thing that the Hamster games do is maintain high scores as a key feature. So you have online leaderboards for all the games and the points. And while the original arcades obviously didn't have online leaderboards, there was always that desire to compete with a leaderboard that was so critical to the replay value of arcade titles. And in this day and age, that really does need to be online in order to, encourage people to try to beat a top score. So that's another neat feature that this whole series has had invested into it, which is really valuable. And it's for those reasons that I actually think that people should at least buy a couple of these things. I know it's quite easy to emulate a lot of old arcade games, and you've got the MAME emulators, which are on just about everything now. You can buy a little Raspberry Pi device for less than $100, which will have a huge list of arcade games on it, and they'll all be pretty much quite playable. And in doing so, those devices actually do a good job of archiving video games as well, and they're really important. I would never suggest that those things actually don't have value, because as games are an art form, I actually think they do have a great deal of value. But at the same time, you're not directly supporting any developer when you do so. And I think that Hamster is doing such a good job with these and giving people a reason to play old arcade games, helping them discover ones that they may never have heard of before, and also adding some features in there to make it, worth your while over and above the MAME emulator and ROM. I really do think it is worth supporting Hamster by buying at least a couple of these. Looking forward, it looks like Hamster has absolutely no intentions on slowing down either. It has 14 games underway that it has announced but hasn't released, at least according to the Wikipedia page. And we are talking about some classics, such as Data East's Burger Time, Nintendo's own Super Punch-Out, and Guerrilla War from SNK, but also some stuff that is a little bit more niche and perhaps people either have forgotten about or never had the chance to play, such as Kangaroo from Sunsoft, P47 Thunderbolt from Jalico, and Seibu Kaihatsu's Whiz. So it looks like Hamster is going to continue this philosophy of not only giving people a chance to play the games that they grew up loving and still remember very fondly to this day, but also play games that they maybe have never heard of before, never had a chance to experience, and will play them and discover that they really quite like them. Such as this one, where you play as a really funky pig in really cool undies running around throwing bombs at other pigs. I never knew that this game existed until the Hamster collections, so this is yet another example of those kinds of classic games that I have discovered and grown to love as a direct result of Hamster's amazing archiving ability and their ability to find games, get the rights to these games in the first place. It must be an incredibly difficult job to track down the owners in some of these cases. But anyway, that's enough of me rambling on about how much I love retro arcade games and Hamster's efforts to preserve them. I would be very interested in hearing what some of your favourites were. I would imagine that most people that listen to this channel have had reason to pick up at least one or two of these arcade archives. So I'd be really interested to hear which are your favourites, which ones you'd recommend to me. So please do drop me a note in the comments and let's chat about classic games. Otherwise, please do like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. That way you won't miss any of them. If you click the bell, you'll even get notifications when they're there. Please do consider backing me on Patreon, because that certainly helps me to do more with this channel. And if you like visual novels, don't forget to pick up my VNs. They are available on itch.io, and I'll have the link in the comments below so you can track them down. Thanks as always for watching. We'll see you next time.